Welcome to another Smart Giveaway Musings, which is really a gentle flurry of interesting thoughts. And today's, I wanted to muse about the one that we probably commonly see and use, templates. But then look at it from very many different angles. And therefore I'm calling this title of these musings as the ideology of templates. Now, whenever we see a template, I think whenever we solve a problem, so to speak, and whenever I say, hey, here is how you want to do it, the natural question seems to be, do you have a template for this? Because it seems that templates are probably a very nice, simple problem-solving aid. And therefore, when I tell something to somebody or when somebody tells me something, the natural question is there a way? Is there a standardized way for me to just do it? Is there a comfortable way for me to do it? Right? So templates have probably earned their place, they work. So whenever we run into a problem, it seems like we are reaching out for some support tool like a template. It seems very efficient, seems very rational. We're not arguing that it's bad or good here. We're just saying, hey, it's interesting. But what happens if it isn't a problem, it is well understood and well solved? But we still ask the question, right? So if there are some complex problems for which a solution needs to be, we're still searching sometimes for the template. So this question still seems to be the same. And the expectation also seems to be the same. So that kind of habit of trying to reach out to find a template to solve the problem, be it a simple or well-solved problem or an unsolved problem, we still ask the same question. The reach is certainly identical, but only thing that the problem itself has changed. So we're going to examine this. So are templates useful only for well-solved problems? That's just a point to keep in mind as we delve further. Templates certainly promise speed, safety, familiarity. Because they seem to give us, I don't have to think too hard. It's a well-laid set of steps. So all I have to do is to understand the template and therefore I can solve the problem. So there is a certain degree of comfort that certainly we have, right? But there are times probably where the problems which are not as well solved, which demand certain intellectual ability, demands thinking. And therefore thinking, if you look at it, I think is probably, it demands that you become uncomfortable. You think about judgments, right? You make judgments. You have to be present in the current step. It's not a very clean, organized thing. It's kind of a messy affair. It's not that every time that we think to solve a problem, it's a fairly well thought out clean. No, the well thought out clean stuff emerges, if you will, out of that chaos that we kind of go through. But it's really not chaos. It's an enormous amount of iteration, I suspect. So let's keep these two thoughts that well solved problems, probably it's organized, it's efficient to do. And so, therefore, a notion of templates, the idea of templates seems very compelling. And in those problems which are messy, which are not necessarily straight away solved, or it's not like there's a very well thought out, clear-cut solution which demands one to apply thinking, and that's a bit of a messy. Keep that thought in mind and then we'll see how to connect. So when you look at the idea of templates itself, I guess one can look at it maybe in three different modes. Templates operating in three different modes. A mode 1, or actually the mode 3, if I have to put the last one in place, is directive. It clearly tells, do this, do this, do this. And the other extreme, the first one, which is expansive. So we got kind of three modes of saying. One is a very directive kind of a stuff, very clearly sharp and pointed, just shut off your brain, follow. The one in the middle, which is really the second, which is a bit of a, not as sharp but kind of narrowing, and the first one being very expansive. So what do they really mean? An expansive is like an aperture that is open. You can see well. It allows you to think. It helps you to see what other people haven't considered. Whereas a narrowing kind of a template gives you some kind of an intent. It kind of gives you some idea. It helps you to focus. It helps you to prioritize. Whereas the third one, which we are probably most familiar with, it simply says, just shut up and do it. Right? It clearly tells you what to do. So when you look at the idea of templates, you can consider them in three modes of helping you stay very sharp and just follow, or give you a sense of direction, point you so that you know where to focus and what to prioritize, but it gives you a certain level of intent. The third one is a much more open. It just leaves you with some questions. It helps you find those questions. It's not necessarily. So I think of a similar idea is what we had talked about in one of the earlier musings on smart checklist, right? But that was very focused on designing of such checklists, which is another form of template. And all these three forms or three modes are legitimate. It's a question of which one are you using and how does it help you in the problem of consideration now. Now, let's step one step further. So where do we say templates? We normally think of it as a kind of a document, right? But then today, templates are in some sense mechanized. It's available in the form of a tool where you when you want to do something, when you want to file an issue, you use a tool. When you want to put together a story and get it implemented, you have another tool, right? So today, if you really look, the notion of templatization of any activity to solve the larger problem of maybe construction, development, deployment, whatever, management, are all done by tools. So tools are probably another ways to kind of implement the templates going beyond the realm of a doc, and they are very directive. They kind of tell you do this, do this, do this, do this, because they also have some workflows, they have some access controls and so on. Let's take a slightly divergent view. Where do frameworks fit in? Frameworks are probably the generalized version of templates where it tells you, if you are building a script using a particular language, or you're building a UI based on a certain frame like Angular or React or whatever, what are they telling you? They're telling you, I have got a bounded set. Kind of follow that, please. Again, directive. Another form of executable templates. Creational templates, if you will. A lot of our habits that we follow are directive. When I say directive, what it means is closed. You just follow, right? So when you look at templates need not be seen only from a very myopic version of some kind of a document which contains steps to do or instructions to do or information to collect and so on. Now, all these are also different implementation forms of temp, which are probably, you might call it, automated or machine-based tools, frameworks, and the habit is a very personal stuff. But which of these, where is the expansion one? Where is the expansive one? If all of them are very directive, then they are very closed. Now, is that true? And is that good enough for all the situations? What if the problem demanded interesting thinking, exploration, experimentation? Can templates help? Or should we say, templates are not useful for those? Right? So we have a variety of different tools. We use tools for test management, defect management, pipeline implementation. All of them are directive. Now, frameworks need not be, again, by the way, only tools. In terms of tools for construction, there are also governance frameworks. So, for example, if you say there is SAFe from an agile implementation, it's also a framework, right? But it's a framework as a governance framework. So you can look at various governance frameworks that are applicable from the process context, right? They are also frameworks. So to a large degree, this framework give you a certain boundedness and have certain well-formed Lego blocks as a part of it, and therefore they probably give you a certain solution. so that you don't have to start from scratch. But at the same time, they bound you. That's why I call them directive. Right? So to leave the last one, the last question, which is up there, where is expansive, really ask yourself the simplest question. When did you last use a template that genuinely widened your thinking, that genuinely helped you to ask questions? And therefore the template is something that helps you to widen your thinking, not necessarily do the activity. Just think about it. We'll probably revisit that question as we go further up. So we talked about a bit of templates in terms of what they are, what their modes are, the variations of how they're implemented, and so on. So now let's step on the gas and kind of look at it much more deeply, continuing from where we left. Templates don't stay as the typical templates that we know. They become tools. Tools become frameworks. Frameworks become standards. Standards become governance. It's kind of an interesting extension of how you think about it. Watch the escalation, right? And it is the same DNA. It is a doll within a doll within a doll equivalent, like the Matryoshka doll that you see on the right side of the picture. It's the same DNA. The notion of direction, directive, control is just that at a bigger level. So I might have a personal template at the lowest level. I might have an organizational template as a system of governance. Maybe it's part of the larger context of a process. Or I might have to comply with certain standards like maybe HIPAA or some other safety standard, etc., which are also highest levels of governance standards. But they still say the same. They are just various flavors and forms of templates, the way we kind of think of it, right? So they don't think, you can't just think of it as a simplistic thing. It's not like a form. It's not like a set of steps. So if I were to break it down a little bit and categorize this, I might consider them. Some of them are higher order templates and some of them are lower order templates. What do I mean? Just for purposes of clarification and thinking, to me the lower order templates are more task levels. Maybe simple checklists that we use, reports of issues that we find, formats of stories that we have to follow, or format of report that we have to comply with. Very low level, base level tasks, simpler ones. But the same template elevated, which goes beyond my personal practice, which becomes that we have to comply with a certain reporting format, use certain templates of styles, or, fit into a larger context of a standard, use certain frameworks from a process or a product or whatever else, are all the higher order frameworks also, right? So it's more like saying, comply with this, build this way, etc. So templates really exist on a spectrum. At a lower order spectrum like task aids and practical and useful, at a higher order they fork into frameworks, standards, and so on. But they're all just templates, right? Just wearing bigger coats. And a lot of them are by default, as we talked about earlier, very directive. Continuing the train of thought, where we started off by looking at, templates are not just docs. They can be kind of looked at it from higher and lower, and we kind of mentioned the term of saying, is it individual versus organizational? If I continue the thread of thought, this is what happens. I can look at it from a who standpoint, and then say, okay, templates as in the context of individual practice, of an organizational governance, or community standards enforcement. So the same template, the idea of template now is across three sets of, so to speak, people/areas, if you will. So at the lowest level individual, maybe I want to be able to have a template to do a job well. I probably want to have some kind of a template which gives me some wisdom. Maybe it's a collective knowledge that people have put together into a template. So I, as a person who's probably not as familiar, benefits from other people's wisdom. The third variety is the other mode that we talked about, an aid to thinking. It is not going to give me an answer, but it will help me find an answer, right? So at an individual level, certainly one can look at the idea of template as as a doer, as a help me to explore, to help me to learn, help me to guide my thinking, and therefore all those three modes that we talked about early, mused about early, could be certainly be applicable. Whereas at an organizational piece where we want a certain degree of uniformity, certain degree of control, certain degree of governance, templates harden because you are not allowed to stray too much. So that's why I said it's probably more directive. And they help us in predicting something, measuring something, enforcing something, and so on and so forth. So it could be things that we have as reports, measures, activities, metrics, stuff like those, which are in some form or fashion organizational governance aspects, right? So we produce certain reports, we comply with some stuff, maybe there are audits to comply with. So all those are, I might use a bunch of templates, some of them could be tools, but they are more from a context of governance. The last one is the organizational, the community related stack, which are basically about ensuring that we have shared agreements, we have a common language, and that therefore it's at a higher level, right? So again, the same notion. Whether it is a document or whether it's enforced by a tool or whether it's dictated by a larger standard, obviously you can see how they pan out in the individual versus the team / organization versus the larger community that we all play with. But don't forget the fact that at the individual level, all the three modes of templates that we talked about could be very alive. Whereas in the other two, as we go higher, it's probably more control oriented. It's more directive in that sense. Right? So having explored that, having kind of thought about or having mused about the idea of templates in terms of for whom, for what, their modes, let's look at it from another view. We all know that templates possibly can carry some interesting wisdom. So maybe you have done this, you know something about that domain, maybe you're a specialist in a certain kind of test, or you're a specialist in terms of how you review things. So what you do is you put in your wisdom in a form which could be reused by other people, and therefore you call it as some kind of a template. You may call it with whatever name, but bottom line it is. So it carries in some sense the collective's intelligence, and that is available in a form like a template, which I maybe am either a rookie or I'm not as knowledgeable as you, and I benefit, right? So it's collective intelligence. So I could be borrowing. So if somebody tells, hey, whenever you're looking for some issues, trying to find out related to security, maybe use the security template because I am a security expert, so I have told you, here is what it is. Now, the highest level, you might say, I use OWASP or something. That's also a very nice standard, so to speak, right? And that's a gift, right? It's not a constraint. We actually leverage. So here the templates provide us a platform for us to leverage, which is great because we're kind of building on somebody else's intelligence. So, is it good? Yes, probably, because it liberates us. So we don't have to go back and re-solve the problem. So it handles the solved one so that your mind can work on the unsolved. So it gives us some kind of a liberation. Much like a person who is playing, let's say, this piano, he's got a bunch of scales, which is really a template. The music is encoded on the sheet, and all he has to do is to follow the music sheet and play and be very conscious about that. But then, let's say, if the gentleman in the picture closes his eyes and he improvises over and beyond what is there in the sheet, because he, in this case, is fully connected, then he goes into the higher realm of creativity, right? Which I'm sure all of us experience in our own ways. So there is certainly a certain amount of cognitive liberation that occurs, which I'm sure you appreciate. Flip side, sometimes we might be dulled because of that, because we just follow it blindly and after some time dull ourselves. So as long as we're cognizant about the fact that as much as it is liberating from a cognitive piece, it can also be dulling. And as long as you become cognizant as to constantly adjust and adapt and evolve with the context that is up there, then maybe it is much more fun, right? And you always feel good about it, right? And the whole idea in this entire piece is to say, unnecessarily don't expect your mental energy. Because every time you make a decision, solve a problem, you obviously consume. So why don't we reserve it for solving higher order problems? Invest in high value ones, which is fantastic, right? And that's the power of those kinds of templates. Now let's switch on to a completely different thought and see what happens when you compare with certain political philosophy. Marxism, capitalism. So we all know about Marxism, communism, etc. are collectivism, right? Where everybody is treated as equal, where all of us are same. We're all collectivist. In a way, that's what templates are. Templates are how organizations collectivize knowledge. Kind of a Marxist idea crudely put to software, in my opinion. Right? So templates in a way distribute what the best people know so that everybody benefits, like collectivization. Now, is Marxism good? Yeah, I'm sure we can dwell into a completely different argument, but there is some gain, there is some pain. But so that the advantage in this particular case is nobody is left hungry, nobody is left to start from a zero. But let's look at a slightly different perspective. So this is where we talked about collective capability. Nobody starts from zero, nobody fails spectacularly, nobody thinks spectacularly, because everybody has been given, if you will, something. So I'm happy with that. So there is a potential chance in such a system that I could continue to stay an average if I did not want to venture out further. Which is from a political philosophy, the opposite of that would be extreme capitalism. Capitalism is what market forces individuals, and we know that capitalism allows an individual to flower because it's about individual's business and an individual's brilliance, and therefore you want to hoard it, you want to patent it, right? So there seems to be some benefit because it allows far more interesting things to be developed, promotes a lot of competition, and we know that capitalism has, in that sense, has some interesting benefits, of course evils also. So, but pure collectivism gives you equality but atrophies because it dulls you. Pure individualism certainly gives you brilliance but fragility. What do you mean by fragility? I could leave the organization. And if the organization promotes a capitalistic style, meaning I promotes individual brilliance, and they don't really say, hey, don't worry about all this stuff, these are all bureaucratic, then I leave, I probably have a problem, right? So, but the thing is, templates sit in this, right in this tension. How much? And that's a question nobody can really answer. There's no specific answer, I'm sure you appreciate. But the thought that I wanted to leave you with is the idea that, there's one side the collectivization idea, and the other side that's the pure individual's idea. And here is in between this ability to solve problems. So how can I leverage and how can I promote individual thinking, which are also tied closely with the idea of modes that we started off with. Right. So I just wanted to kind of put in a different twist by looking at it from a political philosophy angle, so to speak. Let's take a slightly another view, because after all this is a musings, right? So we're just looking at a flurry of interesting thoughts. And let's look at it from growth. A baby, a teen, an adult, a senior. What does it mean? If I look at templates and if I see myself as a baby, it means I don't know, I'm learning. I don't know the discipline, or I'm young, or I'm not familiar. So I am dependent, so to speak, on the template to help me do a job. They are like a survival to me. So you told Ashok, I know you don't know a whole lot of stuff, but just follow this, okay? Follow this diligently. I'm just a baby. So as a baby practitioner, I need the template totally, and they give me protection, they give me guidance, they are really my survival. But remember, I'm not a baby all the time. I grow, which means I use the template, I do those jobs, I probably do a decent job, and then I slowly start becoming a teenager. I start rebelling. I say, why are we doing this now? Why should we do this now? Because that's a teenager idea, right? We start to question. That's when tension starts. So which means that particular template, whichever form it's available, whether it is a paper, whether it is available as a framework, whether it's available as a standard, whether it's available as a tool set in whatever form, somebody is going to ask, why are we doing this? Why should we be doing this in this context? And then slowly, when you are rebelling, your people will help you to find answers, you will find an answer, and therefore the rebellion becomes essential, and you graduate to an adult, where you become a little more conscientious. You know why things are done. You know what choices to make. You know when it serves. You know when to discard it. When it's useful, when it's not so useful, and you make those conscious choices. So you are not anymore totally governed by the template. It is a useful aid. But I know when to step outside of it, and I make those choices, not just fight with it. And lo and behold, as time progresses, I've acquired probably a certain amount of wisdom, and therefore you might consider me senior. So now I think it is a bounden duty of me to maybe use my wisdom and help with other people. So I think it's maybe a legacy, and therefore I convert some of my knowledge, so to speak, into some templates which are more wisdom oriented, so that people can hopefully benefit. The idea that I'm trying to bring, that I wanted to showcase with this idea of, in terms of the growth connecting to a baby teenager, is the evolution. Every template needs to evolve over time. And remember here, when I say template, it's not just the notion of a paper document, right? Every stage is valid. The relationship evolves, and maybe there is a point in time, after some time, you are so evolved, you may not need it anymore. It is now ingrained in your system. That's the ultimate, right? But that's exactly what we all evolve into. The day when everything sticks and you continue on ad infinitum, that is when its problem starts, because we all know after some time there is law of diminishing returns in everything that we do. In this context, that particular template, for example, is not going to be as yielding in terms of results, right? And that's why a good outcome measurement in anything could be a yield, because yield will drop with time, right? And it's natural. So, this is just an observation. I'm not saying that you should agree with me. Probably a lot of the organization treat everyone as babies. The larger the organization, the probably more directive it is. And that's why processes are harder, more cleaner, more sharper, because they want to say, do this, do this, do this. Same template, every stage, every person. Though, of course, as a process person, there is the idea of customization of a process. But there's, if it's done well, then it's not a baby treatment. But then we have to be cognizant about the fact that it is not that organization is wrong or not. It is how it is structured. Now you have to learn to meaningfully adapt. So we need to question, we need to outgrow. But at the end of the day, yes, there is a certain notion of a system that rewards compliance. And therefore you might call it that it rewards people who are sometimes in the stage of infancy. I'm not accusing that every organization is like that. I'm just trying to put the context, put the statement here, so that probably we can reflect on it, so that we know that organizations need to constantly evolve also. And organizations are really all of us together as people, right? And there is a certain amount of questioning, there is a certain amount of going beyond the safe zone, and so on and so forth. So the question really is about which kind is yours, right? And that question that we are asking is basically asking is, are you designing a template for growth, which makes itself progressively unnecessarily? Or are you designing it for control, which makes itself permanently indispensable? What kind of templates, what kind of systems that are governed by a larger context of templates, which kind is yours? A bit of a litmus test that you can apply for yourself and ask. So think about the templates or idea of templates in your organization. Are they designed to build capability and eventually become unnecessary? Or are they designed to maintain control and become more entrenched over time? That is a reflection of the culture of the organization. There is no right, there is no wrong. And finally, as we get to the last couple of minutes, so to speak, so pardon me, I'm going to take another couple of minutes, is about habits. Templates really shape the habits. It helps you to internalize some routine, and that's a habit. The doing kind of templates help me to get into a habit, which is good, a rhythm. The second kind of template is forcing me to ask questions, provokers. The third kind of stuff is the thinking. So I need to have a habit to be able to repeatedly do, to start working on ideating, and last one is in the notion of thinking. So ultimately, you can connect the idea of templates to the habits as an individual level too, right? Which is what we talked about as modes when we started. So taking it further and then probably coming to closer to the end of this, to this musing is about saying, who is it meant for? Is it meant for doers? Is it meant for probers? Is extending the thought what we started off. So doers we understand, which is more like saying, fill this in, follow these steps, execute. Template is the work. My job is to follow the template. Whereas if I have a probing mentality, I'm kind of thinking, I'm digging, I'm exploring, it's a wider spectrum. It gives no answers. It helps you generate questions. So template launches the work if you want to play with the words, right? And they are different. Now, both of them are needed at different times, and they all need to meaningfully coexist. So a methodology like HIBIST, which is what I promote from my company, is more like a probing template at the highest level, where the idea is not to do mechanical. And if you're aware of languages like C++ and other languages, you know there is the idea of templates in a language. So what's the connection? The template is a generalization, so you need to apply it in the corresponding context, right? So the connection to this language was just to illustrate the point that a template in a language like C++ is a placeholder generalization which is substituted with the right amount of variable type, or the type of the variable. If you do it wrongly, it won't compile. So what does it mean? It needs to be in the right context. So process templates, etc. are probably templates. You may have to appropriately adjust it. It is not necessarily the one that which is final that you can consume, right? So there is a thinking template which allows you to foster thinking. The other one, it gives you a placeholder from which you construct and continue, and you can continue in either forms, all the modes that you like. Now finally, connecting on to the AI before we wrap up this stuff is, before the AI we always talked about, here is a problem, I think about it, I come up with some kind of a template which can be any of these modes and continue on. Today it's interesting. I can use probably an AI tool, give it a problem maybe, work with it, and it automatically in some sense kind of constructs the template for me. It has a template internally. It gives me an illusion of thinking, right? Because it seems to be I am thinking, but actually it is helping me think, or it's probably thinking on my behalf. Because it's giving me answers much before I even thought through. Is it good and bad? Yeah, probably good and bad. But I just wanted to highlight the fact there's a bit of an inversion today. So when we work with any AI kind of systems in an assisted manner, I give a problem, it gives me a nice answer. It's already figured it out. But that's what you're going to need to keep. So as long as and it gives me a beautiful whatever, maybe a set of test cases, a plan, a report, whatever artifact that we're looking at. It looks very polished and shiny and so on and so forth. You didn't even know how it thought, right? So it's kind of important, interesting to keep that in mind, that, pre the era of, so to speak, where the current era of AI, life was a little different. And there is a bit of an inversion, so we have to be cognizant about the input. So that's why I think when you look at it from prompts or libraries or prompt libraries or system instruction, same idea, but a difference, the same idea but a different substrate now. So you say I have a prompt, I've got libraries of prompt, I've got system instruction. All these are in some sense manifestations of an idea of template. When somebody gives an AI prompt structure, act on this, follow this format, output this, think like that. And we give it a name called prompt engineering, right? And when we say, hey, here's a system instruction, it's like a governance framework for machines. We give certain policies, they are like compressed and invisible prompts. So same ideology. We're trying to use that in the context with a machine. So I'll leave you with the final thought before we conclude for today. We started off with the idea, is there a template for this? It slowly became, is there a framework for this? It slowly became, is there a tool for this? And it finally became, can AI do this for me? Same question, different quote, same ideology. Question never changed because we're still trying to get things done by not doing it in some sense, right? So templates in a way, answers before you ask. AI gives you the knowledge without the journey that created it apparently. And the output looks like wisdom, the depth behind its pattern, not experience. And therefore the most important question to ask ourselves is, do you still know how to ask? And AI probably gives you everything the collective has known. It's a pretty interesting Marxian idea. Instantly polished, convincing, gives you knowledge, probably without the journey. I'm not being accusatory, I'm just saying it's extraordinarily powerful. But the last question is very interesting and useful. So in summary, I'm not going to read it out, but you get the idea here that I'm trying to tell you that, hey, we started off with how they help, we talked about the various modes, we saw how why they exist, for what, at what level, encoding what kind of experience. We compare it to politics, we compare it to the idea of generalization of C++ as a principle, habits, the role of AI, and we looked at it from the life cycle. With that, the final kind of question is, what would you ask if you truly wanted to think and didn't reach for an idea of a template first? I just leave you with this question. Thank you so much.